The one thing that we can bank on with 100% certainty, what we know to be true, is that we have been lied to and deceived. We need to re examine everything to fix and start over. We need to understand the importance of frequency and magnetic electricity. Now, many people are celebrating the arrests of people like Diddy or the news, mainstream media of celebrities and or the actions of Trump. But trusting the plan is what they always planned us to do. The reason Agenda 21 turned into Agenda 2030 is because they didn't know how to plan the reveal. And you need to realize the word apocalypse, which they're working towards, generates from the Greek word apocalypto, the ancient Greek word apocalypto, which means the reveal. They use the religious texts as a playbook, and the playbook states right in there, nothing will remain hidden, everything will become manifest. These are the end times. Time is circular, not linear. So we can celebrate these so-called victories, and we can trust in somebody else to be looking after this plan to save us. But you can't consider yourself truly awake. You're just in an inception-like dream. You're a dream within a dream, but you're more divided than ever. See, frequency, the word, is the most powerful thing. Frequencies and sound have been shown that they can actually surpass this universe or this universal reality of light, which we have been deceived and trapped within. We need to start looking in the mirror and taking actions ourselves. You need to start, instead of being online on social media celebrating all of these wins and this echo chamber of praise and we knew before you did. Look, the information has always been there. We've just been too busy to look. And for those who say that they're awake and make fun of or create further division for those that aren't, these people are just too busy. Some people are just too busy to look, or some people don't want to look. They don't want to understand that everything that they have, their entire purpose of life, has been a lie. That's a hard thing to understand. That's a hard thing for people to take in and to accept. Like, there's actual sayings. It's easier to deceive somebody than to make them believe that they've been deceived. So if we're going to do this, we need to start at the beginning. And there's lots of places we could start. But let's use the religious text for a second. Now, whether you're religious or not doesn't matter. But there has been an ongoing movement with science and technology over the past 150 to 200 years to make us abandon God, to make us not believe. What are the two greatest commandments? To love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why is that the most important? Is because we are a collective consciousness. We are not the hive mind of this globalist agenda, which they're also using as a deception. We are a collective consciousness, and whoever controls the collective consciousness controls this reality. That's why the propaganda and the media and the control of religion was so important. You have to understand the book of Enoch and why it was removed from biblical canon. It explains all about the fallen angels and the watchers. And then instead of just reading your own religious book, read the others. See, it all starts from one all-powerful God that you can't hold any other gods above. And when you realize and you read the other texts, you realize where the omissions were used within these biblical texts, like the Christian Bible. Since most of this audience is going to be westernized, the Torah, the volumes of the Torah, is the Jewish religion. The Christian Bible is the Old Testament, which is basically a summary of the Torah. The volumes of the Torah, and then the New Testament, which is the scriptures of Jesus and his disciples. But amazingly, Jesus' scriptures were left out. Why would you leave out Jesus' own scriptures? And you can say maybe they weren't written. But now that we've discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, we know that not to be true. So why would you leave out Jesus' own scriptures? Why would you leave out Mary Magdalene? Why would you leave out the Gospel of Thomas? See, religion has been used for centuries to control man. And as much as we believe that the religious texts are not altered, they've been translated, they have been changed. King James admitted it when he created the King James Bible, that he changed certain things to bring his kingdom together that was divided under Catholic and Protestant, Presbyterian, all these factions within the Christian religion. You need to understand where all of these stories began, with the fallen angels and Mount Hermon in the Bible, and that Noah was part of Enoch's family tree. You also need to understand that the woman before Eve was a person named Lilith, and she was created by God. But she refused to be subservient to Adam, and she escaped the Garden of Eden. And she was chased down by some angels or cherubs. And there's been lots of mythology about Lilith that's been kind of covered up. But only recently has this been re-exposed. It comes out in Lilith Fair concerts. The Has-Been Hotel, which is a cartoon animated series on, I think it's Prime or Amazon. You need to understand the Nephilim, and that the fallen angels took wives of the women of men. And they created these giants. This is from the book of Enoch. and these giants devoured everything. And man begged God to rid the earth of them. That was what the flood was supposedly for. But that's left out of the Bible. And then you read the book of Enoch and realize that Enoch warned the fallen angels that it was going to happen. Is there any possibility that any of these Nephilim or fallen angels survived? What about the story of the giant of Kandahar? What about the giant bones that have been discovered over the centuries? As I said to start this, the one thing we can prove is everything we have been told or taught has been lies. We don't know the truth for certain, but we know groups and bloodlines have hidden truth for their own benefit and power. Our media celebrates and sympathizes with Lucifer or Satan. Look at the shows that are now on TV. You have a TV series, Lucifer, that makes him out to be the hero. You read the Quran, and it tells of the story of Iblis. And Iblis was at the right hand of God. He was one of God's favorite angels. But he didn't start as an angel. He started as a jinn. And a jinn is what we know as genies. They're like devious, tricking angels. So the story of Iblis is that God created man, created Adam, and he brought all the cherubs and angels around and asked that they bow to Adam, that was given the gifts and created in God's image. And Iblis refused to bow. Now, it doesn't explain why Iblis refused to bow. Whether it was because he had so much glory to God that he refused to bow to somebody else, as the first commandment states, or the most important commandment states, is that you should hold no other God above him. So that's one. Or the other is that the jealousy angle, which seems to be more played out in most religious factions. See, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was not convincing us that he didn't exist, but tricking us with science and our mortality, using education and the fact that we have limited lifespans, so we can't properly pass along history. And he shows us that God doesn't exist. He convinces us to convince each other that God doesn't exist. And our egos believe that made in his image meant that God was a man like us living in the clouds, which is impossible. It's made a mockery of. We were never questioning our own reality and what we really were, which is a collective consciousness able to create our own reality. We became trapped in this false physical reality of light. Lucifer means the light bearer. Our true reality is frequency, magnetic, electro-controlled. This is why if you read the Bible, it says Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. And afterwards they discovered they were naked and they were ashamed. Because only then were they trapped in this vision of light, this reality of light. Why is light supposed to be the fastest speed in this world, but frequency has scientifically passed it numerous times? So You need to understand this. Everything is there for you if you look. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't want to share my name. I'm not looking for followers. I do want this message to get out. I am not controlled opposition. I was very deep into research. I'm not good at making videos. I'm not a social media person or video editor. But people need to start taking action themselves. You need to start coming together as community. Stop blaming each other for the actions of these sociopaths and psychopaths that have been promoted to the top of humanity to promote these nations and religions. The Watchers and the fallen angels are the keys to our current situation. You need to understand Mount Hermon and the significance of the Golan Heights. Trump awarded this Golan Heights to Israel. He has no right to do so. Pan's Cave is in the foot of Mount Hermon. And this is where the Pied Piper stories come from. It's where Jesus addressed the devil and pure evil. It's known through history for sacrifice of children on the altar just inside the cave. And it still has bloodstains to this day. The stories of Baal, Moloch, Lilith, and then you can get into Zeus, Beelzebub, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, all come together here. Then you have the Egyptian gods, which were from the pharaohs in Egypt. And Egypt holds a very important part of the Christian Bible, the Torah, and even the Quran. That whole area. But the significance of Mount Hermon and the Golan Heights and Pan's Cave is very important. The UN owns a base right at the peak. Why? And right at the peak is where Syria, Lebanon, Israel all come together. This is where ISIS and ISIL were trying to control through this region. Why was giving that Golan Heights region and recognizing Jerusalem so important? It's because the End Times Playbook is the religious text. And I want to stress, it doesn't matter if you believe in the religious text. All that matters is that they do. And unfortunately, we've given them the power to complete the mission. Pan's Cave and Mount Hermon are significant in biblical canon and the religious canon, but it's also in recent politics. Why do the UN, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Trump, and other politicians want control here? If politicians, corporate CEOs, and banking leaders worship Satan, then they just obtained the oldest house of Satan on earth. Why do we have tech and computer geeks buying farmland and residential real estate all throughout the world right now and driving up the price? Ask yourself why. It's really quite wild. Now, in this video, I have a lot of proofs, and in some of my other videos, I have a lot more. There's lots of things that you can use as proof, but it's not time for awakening anymore. That awakening time has to be on the back burner, and you need to start spending time on taking action and getting together with your community. Get together with a community, collectively buy freeze-dry machines so you can freeze-dry food that can last for 25 years. Work out contracts directly with farmers so you can have clean meat, grass-fed meat. Work on clean vegetables. Work contracts directly with your community and these farmers to collect this food now. Work on water filtration devices. If all of a sudden the power went down tomorrow, would you be able to have access to clean water? Money is not important. Air is important. Water is important. Food is important. And medicine is important. And then after that, we're going to need energy. As I said, we need to understand what we really are. That collective consciousness able to create our own reality. And we need to start loving our neighbor as if they were ourselves, because they are actually a part of us. You need to understand the Schumann resonances, the solfeggio frequencies. Lots of people have given us hints to this. Tesla's told us about it. Einstein told us about it. Understand that your body has frequencies. Understand Rife frequency machines. Look into Royal Rife. Understand that Hollywood has a war on God, and understand why they do. Understand why it's even called Hollywood. Ancient magical priests and Celtics had magical wands. Those wands were made of a certain tree only. It was the holly tree. They use these spells and our own words against us. Words are very powerful. Frequencies, resonant frequencies, sound and vibration hold power beyond all measure. And the words that we use on a daily basis, like if you say to somebody, be blessed, you're actually saying be blessed. Words and magic were in the beginning one and the same thing. And even today, words retain much of their magical power. That was from Sigmund Freud. You need to understand. John 1:18 states, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Everything around us, that's what's being suppressed. The suppression of the Gnostics. There were certain factions right from the get-go that suppressed knowledge to keep people in check. The Nag Hammadi scriptures and other Gnostic texts, such as the Pistis Sophia, contained ideas that the rulers of the time certainly did not want spreading far and wide. The teachings included the existence of three distinct types of human soul groups: Hylics, Psychics, and Pneumatics. It's listed here. I'm not going to go in depth with it because the video is going to run long anyway. Gog and the Antichrist, the Nephilim, the Watchers, the fallen angels, Baal, Moloch, which is the huge owl that they have in Bohemian Grove. And amazingly, it's also the icon for Drake's clothing line. Like, we've all celebrated these arrests in the music industry, and we all know that there's some crazy stuff going on in there. It's all throughout Hollywood. The whole reason of eugenics is to prevent anybody else from gaining power. They've been inbreeding within their 13 bloodlines for so long that all they can do now is try to hold on. You need to understand all of these words. And some of the slides here give you some information. And if you look at my other videos, you're going to find that as well. There's lots of proofs out there. There's lots of books out there. Within this video, I give reference to books. Within my other videos, I give reference to books. I suggest that you read them. If the titles are included here, you should be reading the book. You should be looking into this. You need to understand, what if a Zionist group actually stole from the Israelites again, using the Balfour Declaration and Hitler? What if they funded the Holocaust to steal and create an anti-Semitic Semitic shield? That would be pretty appalling, right? Well, what if I have proof in this video that the actual Swiss numbered accounts that they used were intentionally set up right before Hitler, that Hitler was carefully chosen? What if I showed you that the Israelites were not the Jewish people that you think of today? The Jewish Zionists that you know today, most of them are Khazarians, which is a region in the north where they set up the wall of Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog. It was a protection wall. It was protecting from these people. And the Silk Road, where they used to murder and cannibalize travelers and steal their stuff, until the Russian Tsar or king stopped them. The Khazarians is where the Ashkenazi Jews originate from. I'm not saying all Jewish people. The Israelite Jews have been victimized enough. They've had their religion stole. They have been cast out, demonized, enslaved, victimized for centuries. And the modern Zionist Jews are doing the exact same thing. Ashkenazis, isn't it funny that the last part of the word Ashkenazis actually spells Nazis? You need to understand where they came from. The Khazarians, the Templars, the Jesuits, and where they filtered into later on. The Illuminati, the Masons, the Order of the Rose Cross or Rose Croix. And they have control of everything, including the Pope. Right now we have our first Jewish Pope. But they've controlled the Vatican for far longer. See, the Roman Empire never died, and neither did the Nazi Empire. The Fourth Reich is the United States. And I'm not saying it about the people. I'm saying it about the politicians and the intelligence communities that came over in Operation Paperclip. It wasn't just scientists that came over. Again, if you're questioning me, I give you the proofs and the receipts in this video and my other videos. And there's also stories of the Anunnaki and the Dracos and the alien or Planet X history theories. I'm not going to sit here and debate either one. The Tatarian civilization, the Mayans. Because our history has been so corrupted, we can't prove any of it. We can tell that like gene splicing has been done at some point in time. And as I mentioned, there's in this slide right here, you have the giant of Kandahar. There's lots of stories of giants and bones that have been found. And when I'm talking about the giant of Kandahar, in 2002, an elite tactical team in Afghanistan was said to have been killed by the Kandahar giant. It was about 13 feet tall. And they sent in another team to save them. And the operation, it was during Operation Enduring Freedom. And they were in fierce battles, and they came upon this giant. And this has been covered up. When you have so many things that are classified by your government in a country or nation where the government is supposed to be of the people, for the people, by the people, and yet you have an elite group of that government classifying and hiding secrets from the general public for national security. That's ridiculous. You no longer live in a democracy. You live in a dictatorship and you just don't realize it. You live in corruption. When everything is hidden from you and they do not share with the general public that they represent, well, that's corruption. You need to understand all of the original history that we have and that we can actually prove with, like, Babylon and the pagan rituals that we now celebrate today, supposedly as Christian religions. You need to understand Moloch and Baal. See, these things we actually have scriptures on, and we can study. The other things are speculative. There's the odd thing here and there. There's people's opinions. There's some evidence, but it's basically circumstantial. But giant skeletons are real. The Kandahar Giants reports seem real. Where did these all come from? Were the giants of the Nephilim in the book of Enoch? They could have survived the flood because they were warned about it. It's in the book of Enoch. Are there more hiding amongst us in Antarctica or within the mountains and fields or underground? Understanding the religious books have all been changed or selectively chosen and translated by men for power. Constantine did the exact same thing that King James did. He united his kingdom or his empire under Christianity because of his mother. All of the religious books were chosen by the councils of Nicaea, the councils of Rome, and Constantinople, but all overseen by him. You need to understand demonology, which was also part of King James. He wrote a book on it. Then you need to understand that most of the New Testament is attributed to the Apostle Paul, who was Roman. Him and Emperor Constantine are two very important figures to Christianity. What were the motivations of both? You need to understand Paul constantly fought and disrespected James, who was supposedly Jesus's brother. He was a Roman who never followed nor met Jesus, but he has such an influence on the Bible. He ignored James when he was told only to teach to Gentiles. He was the one that claimed that he had seen Jesus after his resurrection. And he was the one that preached this divine virgin birth. He was anyway, Constantine had split with the empire. He had a split empire. And he and his mother believed that Christianity could fix it. Both men had motivations to protect Rome in their actions. And amazingly, the Vatican is placed in Rome. Paul has been constantly labeled as the great deceiver or the fraud, the liar. I want to state here that I was never religious growing up. I always believed in God, and I always had a moral and ethical compass. But I never believed in God. And we'll get into that a little bit later on why I might have started to change my views. It had to do with some dreams and some experiences. And it came with when everything opened up in 2017, when people started sharing knowledge and facts after the Q thing started. See, I believe that that was a great deception to make us sit on our hands. But one of the things it did do is it created a lot of manic researchers to start coming together and sharing knowledge. It put a lot of people on puzzles and questions, and we all started sharing facts. It brought people out of the shadows a little bit, and it was a very important time. And a lot of you, that's where you woke up. And the fact that you listened to people or found some facts at that point in time doesn't make us any smarter than anybody else. The fact that you've been looking at this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You're still reading other people's facts. Unless you're out hounding down everything and you've come up with the total answer and truth to our reality, and without any shadow of a doubt, well, then you're the same as everybody else. We need to stop trying to compete with each other. We need to stop blaming each other and the division, because we are each other. I know it sounds a little bit crazy. I know it sounds a little bit far-fetched. And this is where they're going with the hive mind, because they're trying to prevent people. This is why they preach the hive mind of social justice, is because they don't want people to come together. It's always keeping that fear closely intertwined so they can always pull it out. It's like somebody that's spitting facts and they get one thing wrong and then they say that everything that they said is a fraud. It's not true. But these are the tactics that are used for the division and the conquering. And the Vatican and the Pope became the most powerful institutions in the world for hundreds of years. But during that time, Jesus has always constantly come under question because of the historical proofs that don't line up. And this is because of the way that the Bible was written. We need to understand, are we looking in the correct places in history? You have to understand that Pilate, who was the Roman emissary at the time, would not crucify a Jew for Jewish blasphemy. Crucifixion was a punishment for insurrection, like the Bar Kokhba rebellion, or Bar Kokhba rebellion. Historical dates might have been changed to match Josephus and Paul's accounts of history. This is why I say Paul is a very important part. There was Herodian Jews at that point in time, and they were backed by the Roman Empire. They were controlled. That's why they went to Pilate to begin with. They could never go after Jesus himself. They would have to get Pilate and his Romans to do it. And that's what the rabbis of the Herodian Jews did. Roman control was always the underlying mandate that's quietly upheld. Jewish groups wanted David's line, not a Samaritan, to be the Messiah or Mashiach. And you need to look into this if you're going to understand exactly what I'm saying. Now, I give some information here, but I mean a deep dive. I would ask you to look into Royston Potter or who else off the top of my head? I'll get back to it later. But Royston Potter is a good place to start, and he'll point you in a lot of different directions, because I'm kind of drawing a blank right now, and I don't want to dwell on one slide for too long. The Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls. You need to see where all these omitted texts and teachings came from. And like I said, why would you leave out key things like Jesus' own scriptures? Mary Magdalene, who was closest, Thomas, who was said to have been one of the disciples that understood Jesus' teachings the best. Why were these Gnostic Gospels rejected. The Book of Enoch is another one. You need to understand the words in the Bible point you in the right direction, as do all the other religious texts. Split a piece of wood and I am there. Lift up a stone and you will find me. God is everywhere, not just in a building or a church. The church is the community. It's us, the collective consciousness. And everything around us, the energy and the frequency and the magnetic attraction is part of God. This is the secrets that they keep from you, from all of us. Now, if you want to look into understanding the deception, a good place to start is with the Knights Templar. Like Dan Brown created the Da Vinci Code, which touched on this and Hollywoodized the story. The Knights Templar was founded in 1118, and they were hunted on Friday the 13th. They were all hunted down collectively on one day, Friday, October the 13th, 1307. But during that period, those couple hundred years, they had immense control over Europe. And the reason they had immense control over Europe is because they found artifacts under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem while they were staying there during the Crusades. And whatever they found underneath there seemed to keep the Vatican and kings at bay for quite a while, for those 200 years. And they had extremely high stature. They were the banking system of that period. They loaned money to monarchs. They funded wars, both sides of wars, like the Zionists, the Khazarians, the world central banks do now and did afterwards. So even though at that time there were rumors of them having like occult and satanic rituals where they drank from skulls and had orgies, they still were able to hold the power and the banking system in Europe for like 150 to 200 years. Pretty amazing. And what's even more amazing is that they were collectively rounded up on one day. Now you have to remember, in 1307, we've been told that there was no electronic communication devices. Imagine the planning that would take place to arrest Templar Knights all across Europe on the exact same day, to raid all of these castles and properties that they held. And as stated in Dan Brown's book, they may have escaped without these artifacts being found. So if these artifacts were all throughout Europe, how long did they sit there? And the question we need to have is, did the people in control try to round up those artifacts later on? And what were the artifacts? Now, Dan Brown may throw us off the scent. They talk about the Shroud of Turin. They talk about the bloodlines. They talk about the chalice, the Ark of the Covenant. They talk about all the Holy Grail. But what if it was the teachings of the fallen angels and the women of men? See, the fallen angels were said to have taught men about mining metals and how to create weapons and swords, how to deal with herbs and plants, and how to create potions and medicine. Another place to start is the Jesuits. The Jesuits have been around for hundreds of years as well. They weren't annihilated like the Templar Knights. And amazingly, they have connections to the Nazis, to banking, to governments. If you don't know, they're at almost every U.S. inauguration. There's now a Jesuit Pope. They have Jesuits within the Vatican and have for centuries. Their connections to the Masons, the Zionists. Hidden knowledge for power is how they've stayed in power. And their power is infinite. And then you have the Order of the Rose Cross, or the Rosicrucians. That arose in the early 17th century. But it may even date back to the 1300s or even ancient Egypt. And just so you're aware, Trudeau from Canada is a member, as was his dad, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Pretty sure Macron is as well. Then you have the Illuminati that we all quote today. I mean, everybody's Illuminati nowadays. Jay-Z, P. Diddy, the Enlightened Ones, founded by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in 1776. A date that shows up on the dollar bill in Roman numerology. It was made famous by Dan Brown in that Da Vinci Code book and movie. See, the funny thing is the people that they claim to be Illuminati, this alumni seems to be more like cannon fodder now. The current group that's initiated or that they celebrate openly is most likely just cannon fodder for the media and the plan that they have. They're the fall guys for the real power holders. Diddy, Jay-Z, they're bad, but they're nothing compared to the people that are above them, like Clive Davis, Mottola, Iveen. These are all places that you can start to look. But as I said, don't make this the primary focus, because right now we should be looking at action, getting together with community members, start watching your words, start manifesting your own reality collectively with your community groups, and start making sure that you're looked after. And then, of course, you have the Masons and Freemasons. And these guys are all over the movies. What was that? National Treasure. And, of course, the Dan Brown books and so many others. This is thought to originate from ancient Egypt and the stonemasons. They had secret trade secrets that they used. And this eventually morphed into secret society that used all of these secret codes that they have to keep the secrets of other organizations like the Templars, who supposedly infiltrated them after 1307. When they escaped anybody that escaped prosecution were said to have gone to the lodges in Britain and Scotland, and they escaped to Spain and Portugal. And the Rosicrucians and the Illuminati are said to have connections to the Mason lodges as well. The U.S. founding fathers and signers were mostly Masons And Washington is said to be crafted by actual Masons. And if you look at the overhead view of Washington, you can see it's actually laid out as a pentagram. You can see where the White House is. Like, we've all shared this stuff online. We spend way too much time on dissecting. It's kind of like medicine, where we're fixing the symptoms, but we're not doing anything to cure the disease. And curing the disease is coming together, not pointing out our differences. And they're very good at pointing out our differences. And we've been manipulated and programmed for the past 70, 80 years by television and movies to not trust your neighbor and to blame each other. Even the whole left and right is a big facade on who you represent. Anyway, Masons crafted the USA. You can see an owl in Washington from an overhead view. There's an actual owl. You can see the pentagram in Washington. And here's proofs in this video and my other videos of famous Masons throughout history. And there's some very influential people on the United States and all throughout Europe. Occult means hidden knowledge. And if you're going to look into occult, I would highly suggest Mark Passio or Bill Snobogoblin. These are ex-satanic priests who know a lot more about occult meanings and knowledge than I do. And occult basically just means hidden knowledge. And what these people hide from us is natural and universal law. And Mark Passio or Bill Snobogoblin, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, is the perfect way to start. And you can look into Jordan Maxwell, William Bill Cooper. There's lots of names you can look into. In some of my previous videos, I think I give a list. These groups hid the truths and kept them for their own benefits. They secretly work together while they publicly cause divide and steal our wealth, lives, and energy. It's like a big monopoly game to them. And we're just sheep. They have no respect for human life because they don't think of us as being equal to them. That we're like ants. What do they say in that movie? Ant, meat, boot. Things that they hide from us is the deception. They use fear and crisis. The Hegelian dialectic. Create a crisis, offer a solution, and make the people beg for them to intervene and seize more power and control while eliminating your freedoms and rights. Then they hide things like scientific things, like the ether. They feed us with poisons, surround us with them, spray the air with them. These occultists are evil, and they openly mock us in movies and television. They share the truth with us. They have satanic rituals in houses where they have police or military outside guarding them, and they joke that they're guard dogs. If you don't believe me, look into some of those videos from Mark Passio or Bill Snobogoblin or any of the other people. They'll tell you the exact, anybody who's attended them can tell you. And there are people that have flipped. The media has just hidden them from you. There's lots of truth out there if you look and you know where to look. Occultists keep the truth from us about what the physical world really is. And as I mentioned before, and I repeat it, when Adam and Eve ate fruit from the tree of knowledge. Doesn't say it was an apple, just said they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge. They became trapped in this physical reality of light, trapped to be tested by Iblis, Lucifer. And in that story in the Quran, Iblis asks God for permission to prove that man is not worthy. And if he can prove it, then he gets to sit back at the right side of man. So as much as he was punished for not bowing and not listening, he's still able to wage this test on man. It's not in our Bible. It's not in the Torah, but it's there. And there's other myths throughout the ages where that story is shared. So it's not just the Quran. Iblis is testing the worthiness of the gift bestowed upon us by God. And the occultist men and women that help Satan are bestowed gifts for compromising their souls. Although Satan tells them differently, he deceives them by saying if they abide by natural law, they will be able to enjoy eternity. This is why they tell us their plans, because they're abiding by natural law, thinking that they're going to be saved along with Iblis, but he's just deceiving them as well. This is why they want us to beg for their solutions from their own crisis. That's why they tell us their plans. Some actually figure out that they're damned and try to be reborn Christians or find God. Some are killed off for doing so or speaking out. You need to understand all of this. Look into the people that actually were part of it. Like Aleister Crowley was self-proclaimed the most evil man on earth, or the most wicked man on earth. You know how many people in Hollywood celebrate Aleister Crowley? Ozzy Osbourne has a song about it. Jimmy Page bought his house. There was a FBI chief exposed MK Ultra programs and that child trafficking and sex trafficking with high-level people going all the way to Washington. And again, everything gets covered up. It's really quite ridiculous. And there's proof of that here as well. Now, as I said, understanding natural law, universal law, God's law. Natural, and as I said, not an expert. Look into Mark Passio or any of the other people that I've stated. Natural or universal law is the commandments, with the two biggest of them being highlighted. You must love God and love your fellow man as yourself or family. This is the collective consciousness. It's right there for you. As every man is collectively one man and every woman is collectively one woman, unless by marriage she's made a man. Again, you have to look into that to understand what it means. I can't deep dive into all of it, but I can give you the framework to work off of so you have a basic understanding. This is how when people used to go into temple, they used to tie themselves to their wives. Original rabbis, see, I wrote it here. Original rabbis tied themselves to their wives before entering the holy chamber. Jesus talks about making Mary a man in the Bible. Natural law is controlling your own actions and not infringing on anyone else. So as much as we're all connected, you don't hurt anybody else's freedom of choice or their own freedoms. Following orders or any excuse besides defending yourself and your family does not free you from damnation in natural law. So if you're following immoral or unethical orders by a higher ranking officer, you're the one that's damned in the eyes of God. Using government policy, laws, or wars to damn us is what they do. Because Iblis or Satan or Lucifer or whatever you want to call him wants to prove that we're unworthy of God's gifts. You have to know the game plan. And I know this is very religious backed, or seems very religious backed. Just so you know, as I repeated earlier, I was not religious growing up. I wasn't somebody that went to church on a regular basis. I didn't read the Bible until I had events that happened. I had a dream where I saw cities burning. I saw Mount Hermon. I saw a massive war. I saw a black orb. It was almost like a glowing black orb, repeatedly in my dreams for weeks. And in that black orb, it was like it was illuminated. It wasn't light, but you could tell that there was like a light in the black. It's hard to explain. And within there was like purple, blue, and green gases that were kind of like one of those balls that children have where you touch the outside and charges go through it. But it wasn't an actual like lightning charge. It was more like a mist charge, like flowing through it. And some say that those are angelic entities over top of like surrounding the orb. And there are other colors that back it up. Afterwards, I started looking into it after I had these dreams. And what's amazing is, over time, I found other people that had the exact same dreams. And then I found other people that had different dreams. And then I found several people that had those same different dreams. There's basically about 5 or 6 different dreams that people collectively shared throughout the world. I had a guy from New Zealand that shared my dream. I had a guy from the United States that shared my dream. I had a guy from Canada that shared the dream. Where else? I think it was the Middle East. I'm not really good but anyway, or like southern Russia. They all shared the same dream. There's a lake of fire dream where people are lining up to jump in the lake or river of fire, and people warning them, like screaming to the people not to do it, and people not listening. There's others where the cities are burning and people are going around trying to save, which is similar to what I had. But I mean, if I told you that when we checked these dreams against other people and we omitted certain facts or changed certain facts, they said, no, mine was like this. And it was in direct line. Like when we intentionally lied to double check it or deceived or left something out, the other people filled it in. It was a really crazy time. I know that sounds really unbelievable, but only today can we start believing stuff that we've thought crazy previously. If I told you that I warned people in 2015 that we were going to be locked down in martial law types conditions, people thought I was nuts. I didn't name COVID or anything at that point in time, but I knew that we were going to be locked down in some martial law type event. How could that happen? Others knew it too. It's not just me. I'm not claiming divinity, or I'm a prophet, or that this is my knowledge. I'm just saying my path had led me to the information that I was seeing at that time led me to that. Same as the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. Pinpointed that down to like a month or two. just by checking things like retail spending. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent because our history, our purpose, and our true being is hidden from us. They've planned for centuries. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to counter it slowly. We need to act wisely, prudently, and quickly. And this is one of the few slides that I'm actually going to read outright. We can speculate or feel the truth, but proof is hard to come by. We know we have been deceived, and we are learning more daily. We can take actions to elevate our consciousness to higher levels by changing our frequency and energy to more positive levels. But the fight for time to achieve this requires us to stop the physical destruction that this dimension of light is threatening. We must start taking actions to work together to bond here and fight together, not just online or social media, but in this physical realm. We need to start making your ideology known to your community. And if you don't want to come out right and be vocal, start wearing identification markers that only awake people realize. You can wear something like an upside down flag, get it printed on some t-shirts or embroidered on some shirts or hat. You can get the tetragrammaton, which is the religious name of God, or a wide-eyed logo. Part of the reason the truckers in Canada and the USA, or the farmers in the Netherlands and the yellow vests in France scared the government into illegal actions is because, and they violated people's rights and freedoms. They did it because it made them realize that people were waking up and realizing that they weren't alone. See, the mainstream media and government made everybody think that you were an outsider if you thought differently. And when people lined the highways in support, when people donated millions of dollars, people were starting to realize that, hey, you know what? We're the silent majority, not the silent minority. The median narrative of the media narrative of woke social justice and entitled or fake LGBTQ2 whatever groups were not what the majority wanted or agreed with. It's been jammed down your throat within the past 5 or 6 years. And before we realized our power, they wanted to shut us down. They don't want us to have these physical gatherings of positive energy. They don't want change. And now you have to ask yourself, can you trust online voices or celebrities? And I'm not talking about like Hollywood celebrities. I'm talking about the celebrities that came with the truther movement. There's all this fear porn that's out there. Like people right now are out there saying, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. We're basically promoting fear porn. And fear porn is how they control us with crisis. And this is why working together, meeting with your community, start taking action. You can still educate yourself. You can still share knowledge. But you need to do more in actual change. You need to make sure, like, one of the things they can't do is you know that other working class people, your neighbors and community, are not controlled opposition, or there's a very strong chance they're not. But people that are online, that are being promoted, that aren't being censored, well, you need to start to question that. Get together with neighbors, collectively buy the freeze-dry machines that I spoke about, contact farmers directly, purchase clean food, freeze dry it, learn to filter water, pool together resources, medicine, work on escape plans or protection plans for your neighborhood. They're counting on us to fight with each other. like the Obama movie that they put out with Leave the World Behind or Civil War. They're banking on this. And the fact that Obama consulted on Leave the World Behind, it means the government's actually done strategic studies on this. So they're not just doing psychological and mind control studies and studies of trauma-based stuff. They're doing studies on how they think we'll react to certain scenarios. And they're banking on this. They think that their propaganda will make us turn on each other. And this is where the education thing should be focused on not turning on each other. Start actually going with, I know for years you've learned not to trust society, but this is one where we need to start trusting each other and our natural reaction to help each other. When the blackout happened in 2002 or 2003, people had community barbecues. Anytime there's a major horrific event, people come and help each other. That's our natural instinct. These sociopaths and psychopaths don't think like that. We all want to help each other. We all want to claim we're smart and our egos and stuff, but we need to set aside our egos and just focus on the other part of helping each other. We need to get like toxic free water. Get rid of the fluoride, the chlorine. I'm not sure if hydrogen water works or Kangen water or whatever. But if you know more about that, do that. Grab medical supplies. Hey, you're going to need some protection stuff because there is going to be crazy people and sociopaths and psychopaths running around. Have some firearms, have some weapons around so you guys can collectively defend yourself and actually have a communication plan if the phones go down. Have books. You need to have books. You need to have like physically drawn maps. Most people don't have physical maps anymore because we're all reliant on our GPS. If the power all went down tomorrow, could you still live? Could you still bake on your own? Could you still work on your own? Could you work with just the gas from your fireplace? Do you have the propane tanks or natural gas to do that? We can protect all this. Start working with other communities. Once you have your community set up, start working with other communities to work out security plans for passing information. Because we might know everybody within our community or most of the people within our community, but once it gets to the point where you're trading with others, well, that then becomes the point of infiltration. And if they find out that that's what we're doing, then they're going to have that planned. So you want to make sure that you have safe words set up, that you have a system in place to protect that. People are relying on you. Same thing with getting equipment. You can get vehicles that are older. You can protect from an EMP, put the distributor cap and the battery away and the wires. You can put that in a Faraday cage. And everybody can rely on that one truck or one van or one recreational vehicle. You guys can easily share the cost as a community. You can share the cost of a freeze-dry machine. You can share the cost of fuel and energy and medicine. Everybody, the burden's not on individual families. Collect gold, silver, gas, all of this stuff. Store it safely. And have manual maps and manuals and teaching guides and how to build things. Have survival guides. Have photographs of what plants are good and what plants are not for foraging. And then each person has a job on what they're carrying. Everybody in the community has experience and knowledge. Make sure that you're properly utilizing each person. One of the people, I think it was Ray Potter, that says it: prep, pray, and stay out of the way. Don't get caught trusting a plan that isn't yours. You can hope that Trump and Q are working with 5D chess and a plan to help you and your family and your friends and your neighbors, but don't rely on it. Hope for it, that's fine, but don't rely on it. You look at Trump, and I touch on this more later in the video, but you look at Trump, his relationship with Kushner, you look at his bankruptcy in the early 90s. Rothschild and Rockefeller, Morgan, these people wrote off more than half of his debt. The government forgave him for the taxes for 9 or 18 years. And then on top of that, Russian oligarchs gave him, even though he was maxed in credit and writing off debt left, right, and center, Russian oligarchs loaned him money. So you still think he's for the little guy? You know how many small businesses that guy corrupted or ran into the ground in Atlantic City alone? In that bankruptcy, he left all of his workers holding the bag, and most of his developments. I mean, he's dumped so many small and medium sized companies without paying them. Partial way through the project. I'm really hoping that it's otherwise. I'm not controlled opposition. I'm not telling you how to think. I'm not telling you to be against them. What I am trying to tell you is to be careful. You can trust the person that goes to work every day that you see leaving the house every day, because that person is in the same shoes as you. But if you're trusting a billionaire whose daughter dated a Rothschild right before she married Kushner, they had family dinners. They've been in the same circles. They've written off each other's debt. They've done business deals together and everything else. But now, all of a sudden, we're led to believe that he's against them. And on top of that, you need to realize that they don't let you become a billionaire in their system. Same thing with Elon Musk, in all honesty. Elon Musk, his name is Elon. The name for God is Elion. There's only a Y missing. A Y. Think about that. And I say words mean something. Phonics mean something. The Y to God. The deception. The close deception. I don't want to sound like a quack, but I want people to start realizing that doing what we're doing online is not helping. Spreading all of this information online helps each other learn, but it's basically spreading fear porn to those that aren't awake enough. And not doing any action in your community and having a plan is only setting your family up for disaster. As I mentioned, apocalypse comes from the ancient Greek apocalypto, meaning literally disclosure of knowledge, a lifting of a veil or revelation. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all the stuff that's going on, they're basically playing out the religious texts verbatim, even to the shooting of Trump, to the announcement of Jerusalem, the Golan Heights. We need to understand this. If this was all a big sting operation that they had, is the collateral damage from the vaccines allowed? Like, that's ongoing. That doesn't fix. There is no full-scale detox. So I understand that, like, if they let certain things happen to rope people in, but are you going to let everybody get poisoned for a sting operation? We need to realize that they bought into the Q movement and they used it as a political tool. And you don't want to be buying it hook, line, and sinker. You can buy, you can believe. John Trump, Donald J. Trump, Donald John Trump. His uncle, John Trump, was the one that went through Tesla's files. You need to have questions about this. The occultist controllers always planned the reveal. It was needed for the endgame. For those of you who are awakened by QAnon or the Trump presidency, I want to ask you, what did the movement do? Did it cause division amongst family and friends? Do you still get along with your family and friends? Did we see any arrests of significance by the self-described white hats? Any. We saw Epstein arrested, but then he was killed. And who's Bill Barr, by the way? He was George H.W. Bush's attorney general. Why would somebody cleaning the swamp take him? There's also rumors that he was Clinton's fixer. Was Trump constantly portrayed as the victim? Do you have any evidence of Gitmo incarcerations? Any photographs or anything else? There's speculation. People are saying, oh, I have information, I've heard, but have you seen it with your own eyes? How did Flynn not see all of this coming? He's been in intelligence his whole life. And why would he make those mistakes? How many CIA agents or assets did Trump hire in his cabinet? Bill Barr is an ex-CIA. So is Pompeo. Why would he hire people that he's at war with? Aren't the CIA and the intelligence agencies the enemy that George H.W. Bush ushered into the White House? And they've controlled every president since. The intelligence communities and the bankers are fighting for control of the enslaved population. And all of these groups are working with eugenics to decrease the population. Did the information stop people who are already angry from standing up by trusting the plan? So the U.S., Canada, Britain, but the U.S. especially is an armed society. And we have a lot of ex-military, ex-special forces operators. If those people were willing to stand up, and the militias, were those people at the verge of standing up at some point in time? And did trusting the plan make everybody stand down? You became a keyboard or digital warrior, but you didn't take any physical action. Nothing to change their physical reality, which is where this battle's taking place. Did you constantly look foolish to your family and friends, despite being right on all of these things happening? Where's the public proof? Why did the dates never happen? Why would they push a release of acts that caused harm or death if it was just a sting operation? The entire vax population it seems to be acceptable collateral damage. Did Biden, Trudeau, Macron, and others cripple the world and their national economies? Yep. The whole shutdown crippled the world, threw us into this tailspin to change the entire fractional reserve banking system, the world central banking system. If the QAnon movement was a LARP or fake, why did Trump endorse it? Why did he play along? And if it wasn't, why didn't any of the things come true? When does the Q clock actually match anything good or positive? It doesn't. Did it allow them to enact their plans in the open because we were brainwashed into believing it would stop? Did Trump getting shot win him sympathy and the election? If you were on the fence about him, after he got shot, did you believe that they were actually trying to take him out? Did it look staged? You got to remember, there were people in the audience that didn't move. They were like spotting things. Was somebody with an actual laser to make sure that the targeting was perfect? What did his ear look like before it was shot? Did it look like it was plastic? Was Trump really an outsider? If the media subliminally pushed him for 30 years to run for president, all the celebrities he was on every talk show host, why did they turn on him after 30 years of support? Does Trump know kayfabe, which is what they use in wrestling, to fake like who a good guy and a bad guy is? Could you really become a billionaire without the support from the bankers and the controllers? Could you fight your way out of bankruptcy? Did the Rothschild and Rockefellers bail out Trump after the divorce? Yeah, they allowed him to pay back his debt at like 50 or 40 something cents on the dollar. And then the Russian oligarchs gave him really questionable loans. Did Ivanka date a Rothschild before Kushner? Speaking of Kushner, why does nobody question his support and close friendship with Netanyahu? His purchase of 666 Fifth Avenue? Why does nobody question his support and close friendship? Does anyone think John Trump going through Tesla's files was actually bad and not good? These are all just questions. You must have some. Does this all add up? Is online sharing all that's required to reverse 60 to 200 years of neglect? I highly doubt it. How much do you know about the House of Rothschild? Do you know how they came to power? They used the information of the Battle of Waterloo to gain control over the Bank of England. But the 5 banking houses all throughout Europe did same underhand stock control over stock markets and banks. They basically funded both sides of every war and monarchs. So basically, everybody became indebted to them. Rothschilds poked the king in the chest. The King of England has been poked in the chest by a Rothschild. Same thing with government presidents and prime ministers. They can say or do whatever they want. And what is Rothschild really their name? It's not. It's Red Shield, the Roman eagle on a red shield, which used to be outside their father's shop. That's what they're called. Look into their history and where their bloodline comes from originally. And remember what I told you about the Khazarians and the Ashkenazi Jews. Masons crafted the USA, as I said, and you can see it in the patterns of Washington. The Rothschilds constantly show up in history after their banking controls. Andrew Jackson was like a true hero of the United States. He recognized the plan of control from the world central bankers. And unfortunately, Lincoln's Civil War borrowed money to fund the Civil War. And he had a plan to get out of it, but they assassinated him before he could implement his national currency and remove the corporation that held control of the U.S. This allowed Rothschild bankers into the U.S. again. But what they don't realize is that the French and English Masons and monarchs at that time planned on invading the U.S. during the Civil War. And the Tsar of Russia loaned his navies, all his ships to protect both coasts. This really pissed off the world central bankers and the Masons and the secret societies that planned on this invasion. There was like a window of opportunity after all of this because other people saw this plan that was undertaking where the world central bankers were trying to get a foothold in the US. And these people became the robber barons. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Leland, Morgan, Gould. Who else was there? I'm missing some. There's quite a few. But Andrew Jackson fought tooth and nail to keep them out. Teddy Roosevelt played a good game, but I mean, he basically played right into it. Here's the robber barons here. This is all of them. Bankers tested the USA for 90 years. There were panics in every decade. Some decades had multiple tests. The American Civil War was engineered by the Rothschild banking elite. They used the divide and conquer strategy to take America back by creating a conflict between the North and the South. The North was the British colony, which was annexed to Canada. They think of everything as the Americas. They don't think of Canada and the US. And the South was going to be a French colony. This is what I'm talking about the invasion. This is what they planned. It's pretty. Abraham Lincoln opposed the destruction of America. He tried to issue the greenback, and he fended off the attacks with the Russian Navy. But then, amazingly, he was shot by John Wilkes Booth, who happened to be a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. Secret Society guy. Proven, by the way. So, in 1905, their banking checks finally took place. And as I mentioned, Britain and France planned on taking advantage of the U.S. Civil War. Tsar Romanov, I think it was Alexander at that time, foiled the invasion plots by loaning the navy to protect both coasts. The Roman monarchy made some very powerful enemies by doing so. The world central bankers, the Rothschilds, and even the robber barons and the secret societies of Britain and France. What happened to them? The large faction of powerful enemies the Russian Tsar made with helping the USA during the Civil War already had issue with the Russian monarchy. When the Russian monarchs, the forefathers, forced the conversion to Judaism by the Khazarians, and then eventually, remember how I was talking about the Silk Road earlier in the video, where travelers used to go and they used to be killed, robbed, eaten. The king basically said they needed to find religion. They couldn't worship and sacrifice for Baal and Moloch anymore. So then they picked one of the three religions. They picked Judaism. And they converted under duress from the Russian Tsar. And then eventually they still kept doing what they wanted to do. So then he eventually forced their exile, which is like through the Donbass region and Ukraine and down through the southern parts of the old USSR. They were forced out and they spread throughout Europe. This is the Gog and Magog story. This is where all of that ends up. Like this is all recorded and you can see it. As I said, there's not many things you can prove, but when you actually can prove it and it actually lines up, it's pretty amazing. And the fact that this actually lines up is unbelievable. And of course, Lincoln was killed. And I mean, they made Andrew Jackson out to be one of the worst presidents of all time. The U.S. Civil War had 655,000 casualties. And they had massive losses in farmland, industry, and the economy. They indebted the USA after Jackson removed the world central bankers. And this after they took out Lincoln, and his plan to recover, it left us in a very dire spot. And the mid to late 1800s saw the chess pieces moved into place for control of the world. The Marxist agenda was put in place. Anybody that was exiled was educated in Marxism and sent back to Russia because they were really pissed off that the Russian Tsar helped foil their plan. They created the mafia. And the banking systems in USA, England, Germany, Italy, and Europe were all taken over totally by the Rothschilds. The protocols of the elders of Zion. People say this is a hoax. But what do you know? Basel, Switzerland is the home of the central bankers and the banking supervisory authorities from around the world. It houses the Bank for International Settlements. You guys should really look into that place because they're the central bank. It's a central bank for central bankers. It has like a bunker underneath the Swiss Alps, which is almost 40 stories below the ground. And the employees are said to enjoy world sovereignty passports, meaning they're free. If you work there, you are a free man. You are not controlled or owned by a birth certificate system. They're not subject to national laws or the slavery debt of the birth certificate system. And as I said, they tested the banking system in the US for decades. And then finally, in 1907, while Teddy Roosevelt, who was J.P. Morgan's adversary, was away on vacation, Morgan and the other banks created some rumors and instability for a bank called the Knickerbocker Trust. And this was a bank by Charles Barney. The Trust Company of America was also a supporting one. So what they did is they questioned the stability of Knickerbocker Trust. And when people started doing this, they refused to back them when people started running on the bank for to check on their money. The other banks refused to loan Knickerbocker any type of currency or legal tender printed cash or valuables to back anything, which created more fear and panic. And Teddy Roosevelt, as I said, before cell phones and electronic communications, amazingly, 1307, they were able to round up the Templars, but they couldn't get a hold of Teddy Roosevelt because he was away on a hunting trip. And so he was out of communications, amazingly. So what ended up happening is this massive panic and run on the banks in New York happened. And Morgan and all his friends sat on their hands until the very last minute when they stepped in and decided to bail them out after this panic was widespread and well known. They jumped in. Now, publicly, in the mainstream media, Morgan and his buddies were touted as heroes. Rockefeller and Morgan all seemed like heroes because they came in and bailed it out. And when Teddy Roosevelt returned from his hunting trip, they basically said, we have this thing fixed. You just need to sign off on this, sir. And for many of you that don't realize, the robber barons were called the robber barons for their abuse of employees and their business practices in creating these monopolies. And Teddy Roosevelt was president that prided himself on monopoly busting. I think it was called the Sherman Act. And what did Teddy Roosevelt have to do for this help from Morgan and Rockefeller? Well, he had to promise to subvert the Sherman Act for them. And this was the only way they could possibly band together and create a financial force for this. So they created a crisis themselves. They bailed themselves out with their planned response. And not only did they play the poker hand properly to get them to bail on their other challenges, then shortly thereafter they had a meeting at Jekyll Island where they came up with the idea of a world central bank, which was called the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve became their solution. And this was a home run, or a grand slam home run, which was just amazing for these bankers. So they played the American people and the government, which wasn't fully corrupt at the time, like a well-played symphony. Each act getting greedier and greedier until the climax where they take over the entire U.S. banking system. Now, you need to realize from 1875 to 1905, they were setting up the chessboard. And once they owned the banks and the industry, they were able to do this. You need to understand Presidents Garfield and McKinley were shot. Why were they shot? Did they stand against us? Previous slides showed that many things happened in the 30 years up to it. What people don't realize, it wasn't that long ago. Billy the Kid was supposedly shot by Pat Garrett. The gunfight at the Old Croy Corral happened during this time. Jesse James and the Cowboys, all of that old Western stuff happened. Charles Darwin's time was during this time. Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain. All of this, the Statue of Liberty was shipped and erected in New York Harbor. Ulysses S. Grant died. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle published Sherlock Holmes. Jack the Ripper was still active in 1888. Vincent van Gogh was around. Yosemite became a national park. The Lizzie Borden murder trial. Thomas Edison created the first motion picture studio. The Nobel Prize was created. And the Klondike Gold Rush happened. All of this seems like it was a long, long time ago. But it was in this period. And what I meant by the chessboard being set up is the mafia made its way to New York and then first New Orleans, quietly in partnerships with Albert Pike, the KKK, Freemasonry. You need to understand Mazzini's Italian movement isn't that old. And Mazzini and Albert Pike were great friends. Marxism was pushed, and it really grew in New York amongst displaced Russians, especially displaced Russian Jews and Russian revolutionists. So these Russian revolutionists that became the Bolsheviks were being trained in New York and by intelligence agencies of the United States, England, France, Germany. Tammany Hall corruption case in New York also took place. The ring stole estimately $200 million of taxpayers' money, which would be equivalent to over $5 billion today. Everything wasn't so corrupt yet, but it was being installed. And the robber barons locked down monopolies in all areas of resources, industry, and the stock market, as well as venturing into the banking industry and partnerships with the world's central banks. And as I said, I've listed the robber barons. So after the Knickerbocker crisis and the panic in 1907, Jekyll Island meeting took place in 1910. And Aldrich and other connected individuals to government and the World Central Bank and the robber barons all got together and came up with the idea. But not everybody was for this. I mean, there is speculation that certain people stood against this. One of the people that is said to have been against this, the creation of the Federal Reserve, was John Jacob Astor, who at the time was the richest person in the world. So, would he be against it? Also, the Strauss family and the Guggenheims, they all died on the Titanic, and there's been a lot of speculation that the Titanic was a murder plot to get rid of the people that stood against the Federal Reserve. And I would love to tell you that that's true, but I can't prove it. So where they stood for sure, nobody really knows. But the way that you go about collecting facts is by trying to disprove whatever conspiracy that you come up with. And the way I like to look at things is, the first thing I look at is, when I'm looking at a conspiracy, was this questioned back then? It was. People questioned the sinking of the Titanic. They thought that it was an insurance scam because the Olympic, which was Titanic's sister ship and only a couple of feet smaller. I mean, everybody goes on about Titanic being this massive, the biggest ship in the world, but it had its sister ship named the Olympic that was already sailing before that, and it had a fire in the galley, a fire on board, and which damaged the ship's integrity. And during that time, people thought that the ship was switched out, and they figured this out through the windows, and this happened even back then. See, the J.P. Morgan owned the White Star Line. The White Star Line is the owners of Titanic and Olympic. They were into steamships at that time. And J.P. Morgan invited, now this I could find proof for, he invited some of his rich friends, Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss, he invited them to be on this ship. And amazingly, the day of the voyage, Morgan drops out. He has some type of business meeting and he cancels just hours before its proposed departure. Now, his best friend at the time was Milton S. Hershey. That's J.P. Morgan's best friend. And he's the founder of Hershey's Chocolate. And he avoided being on the ship as well. He had urgent business that forced him to cancel his travel aboard the Titanic, and he left on an earlier ship, the America, which amazingly was one of the ships that warned Titanic of the ice ahead. Now, the funny part about this is Titanic was traveling at such a speed that America was only hours ahead of Titanic, and by the time they reached port at the speeds they were going, Titanic probably would have been there sooner. So why did he switch ships to be there, for time? That doesn't make any sense. Another person that canceled was Vanderbilt, who actually left his luggage and his valet on there. Supposedly he had a premonition that he was going to die on the ship. So he didn't board. But his luggage and everything went on, and he was going to take a second ship. And Titanic was said to be unsinkable. Just seems kind of crazy. You also need to understand that that every possible thing that could go wrong on Titanic did. The binoculars being locked up, the speed that they were going despite iceberg warnings. There were just so many questions, even back then. But the investigation was silenced. Now, this is what I can prove. I cannot prove that that Strauss and Guggenheim and Astor were against the Federal Reserve Bank. I can't prove it. But these things I can. And these people died that night. So this could have been an elaborate scheme to get what they wanted. Remember, these sociopaths and psychopaths care nothing about who. They care nothing about life or anyone that stands in their way. And on top of that, if they are not in direct cause to killing somebody, if this is a series of events caused by their orders, the people that actually create the scenario or do the acts are the ones that are held accountable by natural and universal law. And this is how they play. So were these people murdered because they were resistance to the Federal Reserve? Because very shortly after, the Federal Reserve Act was passed and implemented. And another bonus was the insurance money was collected. This sounds a lot like the events of 2001, by the way. You need to realize as well that the Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banking, is a Ponzi scam. See, they pretend, they make this big stink in media, whether it's Michael Moore or whoever, and they pretend the scam is that each dollar printed by this private corporation or private bank loans money to the United States at interest. But the real scam of the Federal Reserve and the U.S. banking system is that each dollar the bank holds, it is allowed to loan out 10 times that amount without printing any more cash. They don't need to print it. They don't need to print it now or in the future. They make us pay back their fake debt with the original money that's already in existence. So this system, the Federal Reserve System and the fractional reserve banking system, becomes insolvent without war or some type of reset to hide their theft and fraud every few years. To put it in perspective, if a bank has $10, it is allowed to loan $100. And that other $90 is never printed and never reported back to the Fed to be printed. That's the scam. That's the greed. It became the ultimate control of the USA and the free world. This is actual enslavement. Rothschild stated publicly he cared little for kings, monarchs, or government if he controlled the money. He had true power and control. His actual quote for Meyer Amschel Rothschild: "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." That's the Federal Reserve, funding both sides of every war and making us, the people, totally insolvent for their control. We became debt slaves. And once they created the Federal Reserve and had control of the money, They enacted the largest con job and propaganda campaign on the people of the USA and the world. The con make everyone believe that money is power and the most important item for life and survival. They use the media, entertainment, celebrities, and their corporations to create this facade. Happiness was a purchase away, and all you needed was more money, more purchases. Happiness is not external or from material things. It's appreciating what you already have. They made us forget that. They did it because they removed us from the collective consciousness and it led us to a path where the 7 deadly sins rules our society. See, that's why all these modern spiritual movements and books, secrets, like the movie or book The Secret, teaches you about the laws of attraction. The law of attraction and real prayer is appreciating what you already envision happening. Most of you are already learning this stuff. It's being shared online everywhere. And understanding it is most important. People need to realize the secret covenant. The secret covenant is as follows. An illusion, it will be so large, so vast, it will escape their perception. Those who will see it will be thought to be insane. We will create fronts to prevent them from seeing the connections between us. We will behave as if we are not connected and keep the illusion alive. Our goal will be to accomplish one drop at a time so as not to bring any suspicions upon ourselves. This will also prevent them from seeing the changes as they occur. We will also stand above the relative field of their experience, for we know the secrets of the absolute. We will remain together, and always we will remain bound by blood and secrecy. Death will come to he who speaks. We will keep their lifespan short and their minds weak while pretending to do the opposite. We will use our knowledge of science and technology in subtle ways so that they will never see what is happening. We will use soft metals, age accelerators, and sedatives in food and water, and also within the air. They will be blanketed by poison everywhere. The soft metals will make them lose their minds. We will promise to find cures from our many fronts, yet we will feed them more poison. The poison will be absorbed through their skins, their mouths. They will destroy their minds and reproductive systems, for all their children will be born dead, and we will conceal this information. The poison will be hidden in everything that's around them, and if they drink, eat, breathe, or wear what we must be ingenious in dispensing the poison, for they can see far. We will teach them that the poisons are good and fun images with musical tones. Those who look up to will help, we will enlist them to push our poisons. They will see our products being used in film and grow accustomed to them. They will never know the true effect. And when they give birth, we will inject poisons into their blood of their children and convince them it's all for their own good. We will start early on. When their minds are young, we will target their children. And with that, the thing that children love most, sweet things. When the tooth decay, we will fill their mouths with metal. We will kill their mind and steal their future. And when their ability to learn has been affected, we will create medicine that will make them sicker and cause other diseases, for which we will create more medicine. We will render them more docile and weak before us as our power. They will grow depressed, slow, obese, and when they come for us for help, we will give them more poison. That's a secret covenant. You need to understand, as I said, our weakness is our mortality. So when they say that Alzheimer's has always been around, and we never look into it because it's doctors saying it's always been around, or trusted individuals. The medical industry was taken over by the Rockefeller Foundation. It was created by the Rockefeller and Carnegie families to push their petro byproduct medicines, while they themselves use homeopathic medicines. You need to understand all this. Alzheimer's been around since 1979. Autism. The reason those of us over 50 don't remember autism is because it wasn't prevalent. This is from all of the chemicals and frequencies and poisons within our air, water, within the clothes that we wear. You need to realize that cotton and linen actually have electromagnetic properties, whereas all this synthetics that they give to us are basically dead fabrics that cause us illness. The fluoride and chlorine they use for our teeth and cleaning our water is actually poison to us learning, poison to our brain, slows us down. The vaccines that we have are laden with mercury, formaldehyde, foreign DNA. This is why Planned Parenthood is such a big thing. When they're using the fetuses of abortions to create vaccines, or DNA from eggs, from chicken eggs or snake eggs, turtle eggs. All of this is being used and pumped into our system ever since 1986, when the laws were changed so vaccine manufacturers no longer faced the same critical laws that pharmaceutical companies faced for their drugs. The FDA was created by the Rockefeller Foundation. The medical industry and the education system also created by the Rockefeller Foundation. We need to remember that paper money is fairly new to creation. It was created by the banking families that tricked us into believe that the value is powerful or all powerful. Paper money started basically just as scrolls with seals and tracing marks to act as promissory notes to trade gold, silver, and other valuables for trade and purchases that could not be directly bartered between individuals. So they needed third-party valuation. Precious metals were heavy and cumbersome to carry and travel with. And travel was unsafe, with fears from the rich of being robbed. The Knights Templar originally had the multiple banking houses, so they could hold precious metals or items in one city and release them in another, to help facilitate trade and commerce. This model was adopted by the Rothschild family when they opened their locations across Europe. They started with 5 European countries. It included London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, Naples, branches in major cities of those nations. The original paper notes in the USA were actually backed by gold. There was speculation that both Lincoln and JFK wanted to create national constitutional dollars backed by silver to rid the world of the world central bankers and their robber baron counterparts. We can touch more on that later. The scam of controlling the monetary system and the minting of the currency has been talked about for decades. Many thought the scam was that each dollar was loaned to the government with interest, but as I already explained, the true criminality is the fractional reserve banking system that allows them to loan 10 times what they hold in deposits. This debt creation, this debt creation requires constant money flow to keep from collapsing. With inflation and short supplies of circulated cash available, the smallest panic in one city or country can cause worldwide collapse. This is why they try to force us into war or some mass casualty event every decade or two. It's to hide their crimes, their fraud of the fractional reserve banking system. It's a big Ponzi scheme. When the gold standard was fully removed, the Fed and the world central bankers determined the value of each legal tender currency in the world. They do this by loaning money they don't have and buying bonds back so that more money can be printed. See, governments use these bonds to back their loans, but the Fed actually purchases these loans. It's supposed to use it as a regulatory body, but they found ways around it. Their greed knows no boundaries. It's 100% counterfeiting if anyone else did it besides them. Same illegal practice happens in stock markets. Trusted companies and brokerage firms purchase stocks or options with only 10% of the value, and the rest is on credit. They sell these things short, and they gamble on these companies' futures or the other investors' futures. You've heard of margin calls. That's what it means. 90% is due immediately, and this causes stock market panics and crisis. It happened in 1929, happened again in the early 90s, happened again in 2008. See, there's an order of operations with the world central bankers at the top, and they do have certain friends, as I mentioned, with the robber barons or certain brokerage and lending houses. But when it all comes down to it, and they call in for the money to protect their crimes, all the other people are affected as well. And the lowest hanging fruit get exposed. That's their monopoly game. They're playing it every day. In 1971, Nixon took the U.S. fully off the gold standard. But in 1933, only 2 decades after they promised that the Federal Reserve would prevent any catastrophe like Knickerbocker ever happening again, they did it in 1929. And in 1933, they figured out the best way of creating that crisis or taking advantage of the crisis. See, 1929 was created to help the Nazi Party to bankrupt Germany and create the environment for Hitler to take control. But just like in the Knickerbocker thing, they went for the Grand Slam. So they told the U.S. government that they would print more money to bail the U.S. citizens out of this debt. But it took the seizure of all gold. So the U.S. government put in an executive order to seize all the gold in the nation and hold it in reserve as collateral against the printing of this new cash. And at the same point in time, Germany collapsed because of its debts from the Treaty of Versailles. It's one big game and you ain't in it. Or one big club and you ain't in it. And you need to understand it. How do we overcome the wealthy elite? The first thing we need to realize is they have no money. They've brainwashed you to make it reality. They just have credit and your belief that they are all powerful and wealthy. I know I'm being kind of repetitive, but 1912 and 1913 were key years for the world central bankers and the robber baron partners. The Federal Reserve was a huge win for the banking leaders and corporate leaders of the USA and the world because it gave them full control. Titanic's sinking removed John Jacob Astor, Guggenheim, the Strauss family, and others who may or may not plan to stand against the Fed, as we mentioned. Rockefeller hired a man by the name of Ivy Lee, who had done improvement public perceptions for the railroads. Lee convinced Rockefeller to create the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913. He also convinced Rockefeller to hand out dimes to children in public settings, and both improved John D. Rockefeller's image. The foundation was more than an image, though. It created a hands-off third-party control system for competitors, and it allowed J.D. Rockefeller to hijack the education system, the medical schools, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical industry, arts, and other charities under the guise of philanthropic means. And this basically secured him and his friends' monopolies. The basic history of the FDA was to push petro byproducts, oil byproduct pharmaceuticals, and it warred against natural or naturopath medications. Safety of food additives was previously tested by the Poison Squad. In 1937, it was discovered that sulfonide contained a poison which killed 107 people. The previous law didn't require testing. The next year, Congress passed the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Law. The FDA combines law and science to protect consumers. And as I said, Rockefeller founded Big Pharma, and he waged war on natural cures. You ever heard that Dr. Livingston, I presume? There's another company that was related in England, related to the monarchy and the government over there, called Kinetic, with a Q, which basically went down to Africa to discover new diseases, which were then utilized to create further panics and push their drugs. Nothing is released until the cure is found. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead again. 1917 and 1918 were key years to the plan of the secret covenant, to the Masons and the evil money enslavement groups. See, you need to understand, now that the USA was under the control of the Federal Reserve System, the pillars or cornerstones, as they like to state, of their long-term plot needed to be installed. Rockefeller became a massive supporter of eugenics, which is basically population control, trying to create a white master race using selective breeding and euthanization. He supported this in Brazil. It was very Nazi-like. This is not debatable. This is true fact. Arthur Balfour and Lord Rothschild convinced Britain that the need for a Zionist Jewish state was required in the Middle East, and they eventually decided on Palestine. Arthur Balfour was a leading diplomat, a leading politician, and a one-time prime minister of Britain. You need to understand, he created the Balfour Declaration. There's a direct letter that's been passed around, but many of you don't realize that Balfour was also involved in the eugenics movement. Eugenics was hugely popular with the Nazis and the master race. Balfour was involved in a lot of different things. In creation of the intelligence community in Britain as well. With the Bolshevik revolutionaries crossing across Europe, World War I Europe, how did they get across World War I battlefields, front lines, untouched, so they could overthrow and destabilize Russia? Well, with the help of the intelligence communities and the military. Germany wanted the Bolsheviks to reach Russia. The English and Britain wanted the Bolsheviks to reach Russia. The French wanted the Bolsheviks to reach Russia, and so did the USA with the OSS at the time, which later became the CIA. The entire Romanov family was executed, including women and children, after they already abdicated from the throne. They did that willingly. They pulled them out in the middle of the night and did this in the worst way. Unbelievable that this was supported. But as I said, the Tsar and the Romanov family made some very powerful enemies when they backed the USA by lending the Navy during the Civil War. And even before that, when they ousted, and it wasn't directly them, but they still blamed the Russian kings, even though it wasn't the same bloodlines by that point in time, for being ousted from Khazaria. German eugenics has roots before the Nazi era. As I mentioned, Balfour was a huge supporter. So was Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt. These people supported eugenics because with the inbreeding of these families, it solidified their control. Did the Rothschilds create the multiple banking crisis in the USA in 1819? Remember how I was saying they tested the waters numerous times? 1819, 1837, 1838, 1839, 1857, 1873, 1884, 1890, 1896, before they hit the jackpot with the Knickerbocker crisis. Did they work with J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and other robber barons to create the Jekyll Island meeting that created the Federal Reserve to take over the USA? Did the Rothschilds and robber barons fund the Bolshevik leadership and have the intelligence agencies of Europe and the USA help their Marxist plot? That can be proven as well. They loaned them, they paid for the Bolshevik Revolution. They funded that. Did the Rothschilds work with Arthur Balfour to create this Committee for Imperial Defense, the Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the OSS in the USA? Also true. Facts support it all. Why does Arthur Balfour seem to be attached to the Rothschilds? Why were there photos of Balfour with Bolshevik leaders if Zionism was supposed to be opposed to Bolshevism? Did Russia agree to help the Allies in exchange for the Ottoman land division plans for the Sykes-Picot Agreement? Because the changes like the Balfour Declaration were hidden from the Russians. They thought when they were allying with the British during World War I and World War II that they were getting the Ottoman lands back. Did Hitler's grandmother, here's one for you, and somebody that goes really deep dive into this was Janet Oosterbard, I think her name is. And she takes a really good deep dive into this. On one of my other videos, I have her name. But did Hitler's grandmother, Maria Schicklgruber, work for the Austrian House of Rothschild? Yes, she did. Was Maria Schicklgruber dismissed and relocated once she discovered she was pregnant? Yes, she was. Was Hitler's father, Alois, considered illegitimate? Yes, he was. What name did Alois use his entire life? He used Alois Schicklgruber. Okay. Was it Schicklgruber? Yes. He used his mother's name. When did he change it? Did he change it when he was adopted by his new father or when he lived with his new father? Or did he change it 1 or 2 years after Alsum Solomon von Rothschild died and the will was executed? See, Adolf Hitler's father, Alois, was considered illegitimate. He went by Schicklgruber his entire life. And 20 something years after his mother died, and 18 years passed when his stepfather died, all of a sudden he decides to change his name to Hitler. Now, his stepfather's name was Hiedler, so nobody knows why it was changed. And he refused to act, I think he refused to actually take the name, but he came into, when he changed the name, he came into money. He also was given a job within the postmasters and customs, which was he wasn't qualified for. And amazingly, this happened a year and a half to 2 years after Anselm Solomon von Rothschild of the Austrian Rothschild house died, which gives just enough time for the will to be executed or executed. And why change his name 28 years past his mother's death, or over 18 years past his stepfather's, or his supposed biological father's death? Why did he use Hitler instead of Hiedler, as his stepfather's name was? Did Alois come into money at that time? Yeah, he did. Did his customs office job that he was unqualified and uneducated for come from the Rothschild benefit? And did his mother ever suffer for money? No. And she kept her mouth shut her whole life. She never said who the father was. It was always speculated that it was Hitler or somebody else. Now, is this just speculative and conspiracy? Was there any speculation or conspiracy back then? There was. There was a whole big stink within the Nazi ranks when this information came to light. And Hitler put his SS in charge of investigating this, but it was his SS that was loyal to him. And after all of this was transpired and they reported that Hitler was 100% not Jewish, they made up a fictional name of Gruber or something like, or Frankenstein or something. They, at no point in time did they suggest Rothschild. They just made up a fake Jewish person's name. They said he wasn't related to them. Hitler then wiped out the entire town where the records were. And amazingly, the person that reported it was killed. He executed the journalist who reported it. He used Himmler and the SS to disprove this, and then made them publish books and everything to publicly, because in Nazi SS times, a lie, if repeated loudly and often enough, becomes the truth. And Hitler did that. So why would he take the time if it was irrelevant? Did Rothschilds create anonymous Swiss accounts before Hitler started his campaign? You need to understand that in the 30s, right before Hitler took power, the laws of Switzerland and these numbered accounts for anonymous bank accounts to be taken place was created right before he took power. And did Hitler's campaign against the Jews fill those banks? Did the Holocaust make the Balfour Declaration a reality? All of these things, coincidentally, all took place because of this. Kind of weird, eh? Did the Rothschilds hold a party with photos that seemed like Eyes Wide Shut, a movie from Stanley Kubrick? Did Kubrick die after he did it? Did Kubrick also say that he was the one that filmed the fake moon landing? Is he on film saying that? Again, also, yes. Do kings and politicians seem to take orders from the Rothschild? Well, they do. And so these banks were set up by the Rothschild, the Bank for International Settlements, which is a bank above the world central banks, also owned by the Rothschilds, that have bunkers, stories and stories beneath the earth, all created. Hitler's campaign against the Jews filled those banks. Hitler also took over most of Europe. Remember how we spoke earlier about the Templar Knights hiding artifacts all over Europe? The only people that had control of enough of Europe to find those would be Napoleon and Hitler. What did they find? Another question we'll touch on in a couple minutes. Sykes-Picot was why the Russians joined the Allied forces, as there was always bad blood between the Russian and the Ottoman empires. The agreement was never intended to be ratified. So, as I said, the Russians joined the war because they thought they were getting control of areas that used to be theirs. Meanwhile, Britain and other international entities were dividing this up secretly for several different deals, one being the Balfour Declaration. Not trading in good faith. Do many of you know that Trotsky, so the Bolshevik Revolution was Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin. These are the people that created communism in Russia through the Bolshevik Revolution. And when Lenin spoke in English, he had an Irish accent. He spent so much time in England and the British Isles. He learned to speak English quite fluently. I think one of his teachers was Irish, so he had an Irish accent. Trotsky was in New York. Both of them worked for newspapers. So you need to understand, in 1917, the Rothschilds funded Lenin, Trotsky with $20 million. Real names were Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov and Lev Bronstein. They were both Jews. Not Israelite Jews, Khazarian Jews. They funded them through the Schiff banking family to overthrow the Russian Tsar. And they planned to murder him and his family by a red flag revolution. The Rothschilds then prevailed, and the Russian central bank enslaved the Russian people to the Jewish red flag socialist elite. Russia was the first red flag Jewish dictatorship, and between 20 to 100 million white Christians were murdered in an orgy of executions, rape, torture, and enslavement. You need to understand all this. This isn't anti-Semitic hate. These are facts. You need to understand the Russian Revolution was funded by the robber barons, the world central bankers. Allen Dulles and his brother. Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA, for many of you who may not know. And his brother created the Treaty of Versailles, which was what gave Hitler the platform, which is what crippled Germany and gave Hitler the platform to create the Nazi Party and take power in Germany and Austria. The the party was funded by Schiff and Warburg, an agent for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, as revenge against the Romanov and Russian monarch-led protection of the USA, and for the Khazarian exile. Tsar Nicholas's entire family was executed. Communism demonized farmers and the people. It took their lands, and the people suffered as nations suffered for the transition and state control. They left the pleasant peasant class that they utilized to gain control. They basically left them at the bottom to starve. millions starved. You need to look into this. You need to understand the Dulles brothers and their fingerprints on all this. Arthur Balfour, other OSS, CIA, DMI, DNI, Duxiem in France, the KUK in Austria, the FIS in Swiss, the German intelligence, all housed and taught or funded Bolsheviks and Russian revolutionaries. Pretty amazing, eh? And then they were partners with them. They were their allies, but they funded all of it against them. The World War I was extremely unpopular, and it gave them the foothold for the revolutionaries to take over. And the Allies basically stabbed the Romanovs in the back. John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles wrote the Treaty of Versailles. They were integral in world politics. And you need to understand how Dulles Treaty set the stage perfectly for Hitler. They funded Nazis as per the letter from Albert Pike to Mazzini. The Dulles family are key players in and out of the shadows. They wrote the war guilt clause of the Treaty of Versailles that Hitler specifically utilized. If you're in Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, when he wrote the Accords and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, left the ambiguous wording of that Charter of Rights and Freedoms for his son so they could utilize the Emergencies Act illegally and step on your rights and freedoms. This is all well played out, well plotted. The Dulles brothers were lawyers for the banks that traded and funded the Nazis. Those Swiss banks that we talked about, where the Nazis put all their gold and the Jewish people from all these countries that were escaping them put their gold that could never be reclaimed again because they were in anonymous numbered accounts. And once the paperwork was lost, they couldn't get to their money. Since lawsuits have taken place to try to reclaim some of it, but none of it will be fully recovered. Were they actually stealing from them or just hiding their crimes of the theft that had already happened? Dulles was the head of the OSS and the CIA. Him and his brother were Secretary of State. They created the Cold War framework. They sat on the JFK Warren Commission. They installed and ousted the Shah of Iran. And they were mentors to George H.W. Bush. Here's exactly the Dulles brothers and how they're key figures. As I mentioned, they were lawyers for the Rockefeller family, the Schroeder family, and did work for Morgan and other robber barons and heads of industry. Were key in writing the Treaty of Versailles and the War Guilt Act that gave the Nazis a platform to gain popularity. They helped the bankers fund the Nazis and skirt the laws. They helped with Reza Shah of Iran seizing power in 1925, and also helped in forcing his abdication in 1941 for his son to take power with more Western ideologies, and more likely for BP oil and American oil interests to be able to build their refineries and oil drills. And then they ousted him in 1979 because he asked for a more fair share after all of the equipment had been in there for decades. And instead of giving a fairer share to the Iranian people, they ousted him and took Khomeini out of exile. And when they installed Khomeini, they added the Ba Party to Iraq. The Ba Party is Saddam Hussein. George H.W. Bush and all the intelligence agencies were a great part of that. And then they went to war at him when they went to war with him when he decided that he was going to sell oil in euros and disrupt the world petrodollar and OPEC system. Dulles' brothers were instrumental in the creation and the early years of the CIA. They were instrumental in advising presidents and the USA governments for decades. And they fought with JFK about Indonesia. Alan Dulles was fired by JFK, and then amazingly, and JFK threatened to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Amazingly, after his assassination, Alan Dulles was asked to be on the Warren Commission to investigate the very assassination that was most likely plotted by his friends. We'll get in more in that in a little bit because there's a lot of proofs that go with that, like George H.W. Bush being in Dealey Plaza that day.